Hey everyone, we have Faris here, and
Hey,
actually we met in one of the CityJS events, and it was so cool listening to Faris on a lot of things related to front end, and we are gonna do all the resilient front end related stuff on the enterprise. So Faris, tell me more about what exactly we are going to learn today.
I can't believe April was already so long ago when we met at CityJS. It feels like we had this conversation just a couple of days ago too. But yeah, so my name is Faris, as everyone already knows, and I'm a staff front-end engineer at Small PDF. But that's one of the many hats that I currently wear. I'm also the co-founder of a meetup in Zurich called Zurich
Nice.
JS.
Yeah.
And then also I tend to speak at conferences, predominantly CityJS. I think I went to the London one this year and the Athens one. And then there are a couple more conferences that I'm going through the rest of the year, predominantly talking also about things around designing resilient front-end systems, engineering leadership, and everything around payments and finance, since that's my bread and butter.
Amazing. And how can I forget your company or whatever you do? Because Small PDF has been savior for a lot of students and professionals like me for free, and a lot of editing tools are there inside this particular nifty tool. So it's so cool. Thank you so much for creating something like that. And also we are looking at so many things on the enterprise side of stuff. So let's start with something very simple. You worked on front ends under pressure across scale, product shifts, and teams. What has been your biggest growth edge as an engineer?
The way I like to answer that is I like to say you should have front end expertise, full stack exposure. And what I mean by that is that people think that, sometimes if you're facing a problem, whether it's a performance one or it's something else, that your realm is just, or your scope is just the front end world. And so being able to communicate in the language that the backend team does. And I'm not talking about the language that, if your front end's in JavaScript and the backend's Java, you should be able to communicate in both programming languages, but being able to communicate in the world that they do from an engineering perspective in terms of APIs and the problems that they face, database connections, all that sort of stuff. And then also being able to speak product languages to be able to communicate with business analysts, scrum masters, and also product owners allows you to be able to take on the full breadth or 360 view of an end-to-end of a problem. So whenever you're working under pressure, you're not able to just understand what you can do within the scope of your world, which may be the front end, but how you're able to coordinate efforts amongst multiple teams and domains to be able to aid everyone in getting towards a solution. And so I think that's incredibly important, and that falls along the line of it's great to also be a T-shaped individual where you have a lot of breadth of understanding in multiple subjects and then a lot of expertise in an individual one. I think your audio's cut out, Praveen. At least I can't hear it.
No. It's fine. Sorry about that. So it always happens, right? And one thing that I have always seen because I'm so passionate on front end, the way I introduce to people is my wife is JavaScript, my girlfriend is React.js, and I'm a full stack developer. And I'm a director of engineering at one of the top big three credit tech agencies. And that's fine. Now, the question is, I have been posting a lot of things on LinkedIn, and I kind of get this crazy question. Front end is not real programming. JavaScript is not real programming. You should do it in COBOL and stuff like that. That's so crazy. I just can't handle that kind of a thing. So coming to the question, what does real world front end actually mean to you? Where do most engineers get a false sense of progress? Is this something like an imposter syndrome or something like that?
I think there are two parts to this. The first part is the whole idea of programming versus engineering. And programming is very much how I see it, is looking at one side of a problem, or being able to, I'm just writing a JavaScript file in my IDE and I'm just programming individual functions, individual unit tests. I'm just writing code. And engineering is sort of the orchestration of multiple sets of code, the way I see it, whether that is your singular front-end files, where across an entire project you may have thousands of those, and how those systems work together. And then also, how do your front-end systems or JavaScript systems function with back-end systems? How do you deploy those? What do your CI/CD pipelines look like? And so engineering has a much larger scope. And when they may say that, front-end programming isn't something that's maybe well regarded or very even real or very, very complicated to do, it may be just the idea that somebody's putting up a simple HTML page, static HTML page, throwing in a bunch of basic CSS, throwing that up on a static web page, deployed it, maybe GitHub pages, and that's where you leave the work. Whereas building an incredibly highly available system that's used by millions of people, that has several downstream providers and works with multiple points of failure, requires real engineering. And that's where the whole concept of like I said, real world front end or real world React comes in. Is because I've seen a lot of people just develop for localhost. And what I mean by develop for localhost is that I go localhost 3000, npm start or pnpm start or whatever you want to call it. And you just see whatever works on your machine and your powerful M4 MacBook or whatever it is, and you don't cater for individuals that may have much older devices that maybe haven't been upgraded for a decade and things like that. And so there's that aspect to it of like, we don't realize that sometimes the systems that we use to test our products aren't systems that are going to be using and consuming our products. And then there's also that other side of it where like, sometimes you're in this little bit of a bureaucratic engineering space where you're forced to sort of have certain metrics on your side when you're deploying things. And what I mean by that is, if I want to get this code into production, it's got to have 95% coverage of unit tests. That's the baseline of everything. And so metrics are like one of the primary things that we love to gamify as engineers. I mean, if you're a lazy engineer, you're going to find the easiest route to get something done. And so if you want to have test coverage, you're going to write tests just for the sake of writing tests. And those may not even be ones that are actually testing what you wanted to test. And so you're just trying to game metrics and get something out as soon as possible to be able to move that Jira ticket all the way into done, and have no end-to-end ownership of what happens beyond that space. Once it's out, does it work the exact way it was working in your local machine? Is it going to perform in the real world, the way you expect it to? Those are questions that are really important to answer in the post-deployment process.
Got it. So you talked about the local host related stuff. The way this is something totally different. So I saw this particular amazing project called Local Stack, and this is amazing. You get the complete AWS stack inside your computer. Like if you have a M1, M4 Pro, or I think I have an M3 Max, which is inside the shelf. I'm trying to see if I can trade it for an M4 Max without getting any trouble, but let's see what happens. And this is a common question that I have after talking to you just now. So metrics. I am working in an enterprise architecture, and are just having SonarQube metrics or unit test metrics, are they enough to like gauge our performance or like anything? I feel no, but there are also snapshot testing. There is like unit testing, coverage, test code coverage, SonarQube. Do you think all these metrics make any sense, or like what is your thoughts about that?
It's interesting that you mentioned the snapshot testing one. I was actually we hosted Zurich.js last week, and there was a little bit of a conversation that I was having with a couple of people around snapshot testing, and I heard that, and I don't know where this is from. I'm sure this is one of the conferences I went to, and I was having a conversation with somebody, and they told me that they actually had a CI/CD pipeline that every time their snapshot tests fail, it would automatically run the update command and update the snapshots.
Exactly, that is and the reason I was like thinking. Even in the local ways, when we are running the unit test, it says snapshot fail. Oh, snapshot fail -u. That's it. So what is the use of that? Even like I'm like no idea. I couldn't find a use case for it.
I mean, there can be a use case for it. I mean, they're fantastic. It's all about also your practices and how they're used and how they're enforced. So, like, if I am in an engineering space that's all about gamifying the metrics, then it's going to be super easy to just update my snapshots and not have a problem. And it depends. Are you thinking about database update snapshots? Are you talking about, HTML, JSX snapshots, all that sort of stuff? Like, there are different use cases, but it kind of, the metrics conversation is a very difficult one, and one sort of a concept that I think applies really well to how you should look at your metrics is actually observing DORA metrics. And DORA metrics I find to be really, really cool. I mean, some of the DORA metrics are like mean time to resolution. So like, how long does it take to fix something once something has gone wrong in a production system? Or like lead time to changes, how long does it take to get from code commit to running in production? Deployment frequency, and a couple of other things. But if we take that mean time to recovery resolution, or there's even that other one called change failure rate, how many times does something you deploy cause a fail in production? Those are really interesting metrics in terms of end results. Or outcomes? Why do we write unit tests? Why do we write end-to-end tests or integration tests or component tests or like visual testing? And there's so many different layers that you can integrate, from a manual perspective, having QAs that do smokes and regressions and sanity tests, to automated testing, to linting and TypeScript. There are layers upon layers upon layers that we use as developers to be able to give us a certain level of confidence that things are going to work in a production environment, because that's what matters at the end of the day. Even the whole idea of building multiple environments, like user acceptance testing environments, staging environments, sandboxes, so on and so forth. And so just because I have 95% unit test coverage gives me no indication on whether something's going to successfully work in production, or the chances of those working in production or not. Yes, it may increase my confidence, and that may even be a false confidence, or sometimes it depends on what your standards are around writing tests, that you may give you a certain level of confidence. Again, everything has a little bit of a perception, or it depends. Then yeah, that can be a little bit different. But if we look at DORA metrics, change failure rate, if we take that one specifically, only cares about the idea that if I ship something and it breaks, it starts to ruin that metric. That metric does not care how you get to the end result. If I have a 0%, and which is very unlikely change failure rate, it doesn't care what my unit test coverage is. It doesn't care how many resilience patterns I have. It doesn't care what I have in place. It cares about the end result and making sure my system is available and functioning for users. Same in the mean time to recovery. I could have all the unit tests in the world, all the amazing CI/CD pipelines in the world, and all the resilience patterns in the world integrated. But if my deployment breaks and then I don't have an automatic rollback system in place, or a system that notifies engineers through an appropriate amount of observability and monitoring, then I have no pager duty. Like, I have no idea that I need to do something to go back to the previously working version. That's what I love about these metrics so much. Naturally, these can be gamified too. But it's the idea that you shouldn't just focus on one vertical. You should see how each of these verticals are moving the needle and the end result that the user actually cares about, because they will never care how many unit tests you have.
Agreed. So that's something true. And talking about the architecture side of things as well, a lot of people focus on the UI look and feel, the polished things. You focus on systems. Yeah. What shifted your thinking towards resilience and architecture?
On the UI part, I think what draws to me is sometimes some of the conversations I have in my React performance workshop. So sometimes I'll give like a good 8-hour workshop on React performance. And so in that, we're talking a lot about, component design and like, how do you create your state architecture, or how do you create your mix of state and props that is going to make it really performant for, let's say, a table to render or a list to render. And so you may be having a conversation on how to design the perfect list component. And at the end of the day, if your list component is going to be used in a manner where it never has to render more than 10 rows, there's no real point in actually spending all that effort making it that performant with all your memoization tricks and breaking up your state X and Y ways and using Zustand and Redux and whatever. It doesn't matter if the end result is that not many people are going to use it. What does matter if, let's say, you've got a front end that only has 100 users, but it's hitting a backend that is used by or consumed by hundreds of thousands of users, millions of users. Now you've got a bit of a disconnect where you may not have to design the perfect components. You can design them incredibly basic, and that's your UI. And maybe, sure, you go for style components and adding a little bit more JavaScript in your bundle versus Tailwind and things like that. You may make certain compromises for improved developer experience, but a little bit less performance when you don't need it. But then you have to cater for the fact that the service or the downstream providers that you're plugging into to get your data as a front end are more fragile, potentially due to the load that they receive. And so that's where you have to think about, okay, how's my system going to recover or act when something goes wrong, which generally isn't the case in a local host environment. You don't have timeouts that occur from your backend. You don't have maybe denial of service attacks that take place. And then you may have to think a little bit beyond your standard retries. It's not just the retries. It's not even just the exponential backoffs. It's sometimes thinking about thundering herd problems and how to introduce the right amount of jitters and so on and so forth. There's a lot more depth to making sure your system functions under pressure and understanding all the components and pieces of fragility and points of failure that contribute to it. And that's where system thinking comes in place. There is a place for optimizing UI when you have an incredibly data-intensive or graph or chart-oriented application. That's not always required.
We spoke about a lot on component side of things, right? Now, when it comes to components and patterns, how do you decide which patterns to actually implement and which to ignore? Not everything from the backend belongs on the front end, right? So we do have, when I was designing a lot of React related stuff, I used to say this way: we should work on the back end of the front end, and there will be the front end of the back end, which is basically the API part of things. So which one, what to ignore, what to look at actually implement. So how do you decide which patterns to actually implement?
For that, I think there's a lot more context required on when you want to decide what patterns to forego and what patterns to include. So do you have a particular scenario in mind for what kind of system are we building or working with in terms of what patterns do we may want to employ or not employ?
True. Most of the patterns that involve queuing and we are talking about front-end patterns, not the system design patterns, right? What could I tell of that would be a best example at this context? Let's say, okay, we will take the complex applications. Like, for example, LinkedIn. People are watching this live on LinkedIn. So what kind of a pattern should we look at? And there are so many beginners who are watching right now. There is a person, I think he's asking something about, Nikhil is asking about front-end engineering. He's a bachelor of, full stack engineering, and he's just completed his undergraduate as well. So people like them, they would love to implement something very simple. Say the best example, which I would say in India would be for students, hotel management, student management, things like that. Yeah. There are hundreds of common pattern-oriented applications. And at the same time, when it comes to enterprise, let's talk something complex, LinkedIn Live, the whole LinkedIn application. Now, having this as a context, what would you say?
Yeah. I think the context is incredibly important, and if you're looking at large platforms like that, you're doing as much as you can to optimize the amount of data you're consuming or bundle sizes and so on and so forth. So for larger platforms, they tend to go for things like lazy loading components, or trying to reduce your bundle size, or trying to have dependencies that are very tree shakeable, or being able to break down and have your NPM modules in a way that you're able to import just maybe individual functions of certain things rather than entire libraries and whatever. Those are things that are incredibly important, especially where you have if you're looking at LinkedIn or any content-rich website, you want to be able to also, especially one that's infinite scrolling, you want to be able to have viewport-based data fetching. Infinite scrolling and loading. You go all through that LinkedIn feed. You're trying to actually assess that what's in the viewport and what are the things that should be loading next, rather than loading everything all in one go. You don't know where things are being viewed. Same with data streaming and all that sort of stuff. You want to be, right now we're streaming this in 4K resolution. I don't think everyone is going to have a device that's going to be able to support that, or a bandwidth. Or right now I'm in Amsterdam. So for example, I'm on data roaming right now. So do I want to consume all my data roaming? Not necessarily. And I think a lot of platforms, I'm not sure if LinkedIn has this, but I know Instagram does, where you can actually put a data roaming toggle on, and it's going to change the way it consumes data and the bandwidth usage and so on and so forth. And I think when you're targeting a global scale, no matter what the platform is, you have to target the lowest end device or the worst case scenario of the experience you want to be able to give somebody where they're using 3G networks or so on and so forth, and then build upon that. I think from a patterns perspective, there's so many things you can look at, from when it comes to caching or offline first or making progressive web apps. That's very dependent on the type of applications you're building. And if we were talking about, for example, financial dashboards, I would give a very different outlook on that. Like with financial dashboards, you have license and legal risks when it comes to what patterns you implement. So let's say for querying data for a list, and that first query fails, I would attempt to retry or retry with a delay. If we're talking about a financial dashboard, and let's say creating a transaction, which would be considered a mutation or like a non-idempotent request, you would never, ever retry a request that fails. If you do that, creating duplicates that you would have to reconcile and all this sort of stuff poses an incredible amount of risk on that application. Whereas maybe, let's say, and I don't know, let's say for LinkedIn, if you fail to create a post, maybe it retries a second time. Having a duplicate post isn't the biggest deal in the world, except it, depending on what services of AWS you're using, it may just consume more storage or more expense to be able to host those particular things. So again, it's like every situation has the patterns that you want to be able to use and the patterns that you have to avoid at all costs. You have to just know the risk tolerance and also the user groups that you're targeting.
True. Whenever you are starting to program on something, make sure you read the list of anti-patterns and make sure you don't get into the trouble or something like that. Yeah. Idempotency and transactions and banking, financial. Oh my God, that's actually scary stuff. So what if I want to send someone like 200 pounds or even 100 pounds and then it doubles it? No.
Well, that's actually something that can happen, because in the financial world, if you ever worked with Stripe, actually, they have this concept. Most of these financial applications, due to how programming languages are actually perform mathematical calculations, you actually have the scaling and descaling of numbers, or having scaled and unscaled numbers. So for a £10 transaction, you actually send the number as 1,000, for example. You'll times the number by 100, and that's how exactly. And so that actually even gets complicated when it comes to managing decimal points and different currencies. So like in Japan, there's no decimal points when it comes to your currency, whereas in euros, you do. You don't have that in Japan. So there's complexities that come with that too. So when you're designing these systems, and you get the math wrong in terms of how you manage scaling these numbers or not, you actually can have a case where you send the wrong number around.
Also think about this. There is this currency called Omani Riyal. They have 3 decimal places.
Yeah.
So it is crazy and scary as well. So talking about being in a team, and I have been working with a lot of startups, a lot of small companies, small and medium enterprises, where I go in as again, my employer, I'm just doing it as a volunteer work. So a lot of places I go in as a consultant, and I end up being the only front-end engineer in the team. So how do you advocate for time to build things that makes the system stronger, not just shippable? We don't want a MVP, we want quality.
I've been actually the past couple of months I was working with one of my mentees on mentor crews with this, and this is quite an interesting space because most companies, or I mean in any company, if you think about it this way, is that they want to put in the most resources or the most effort in what moves the needle or what makes the most money. And so if you are a singular front-end engineer and you're working with 10, 20 back-end engineers and you're an API first product, naturally all the effort and all the value proposition is going to be centered around the API. So then you'll probably think like, okay, how do I justify re-architecting something or shifting a library, or how do I justify 2 weeks of tech debt work when there's no understanding of the value proposition that the front end may build, maybe bringing. And for that, I really suggest understanding the business side of things a lot more. And so you need to be able to advocate for your own time. Just like if you have a technical product manager, it's really great that you're able to tell them how a certain piece of tech debt or rebuilding something is going to improve things. But when you have a non-technical product manager or product owner, you need to be able to distill all your technical details of cleaning something up or refactoring something in a way that's understandable about how they can justify to their stakeholders how to give you that extra time. And so in the same world, you need to be able to, like, I think one of the examples that I was talking with a mentee of mine is that they generally have to work with a lot of API endpoints that aren't ready. And when they're not ready, you implement like a version 1 of them, and then the contract changes, and then you change things around, and now your component design is off. And so then, okay, you need to move maybe to creating open API specs. The backend has to create open API specs and work in an API first design model. Then they create the open API specs, and then you want to use that with MSW to be able to generate mocks and generate types off of that and whatever. And so that takes time to justify all of that. And being able to actually go and use your business metrics, whether your business metrics are in Looker or Metabase or Google Analytics or PostHog or Datadog, wherever it is, being able to go and look at those business metrics and then tell somebody that's on the business side of things that, hey, if I do this, there's an X amount of likeliness that this is going to be able to affect this metric. And this is a metric that's part of our OKR or our business focus right now. So let's see if we can make this bet and what may come out of it. And it's the word bet is something that I put a big emphasis on, is because being in an engineering space that allows you to risk failure and make several bets is also an incredibly important thing. If your risk tolerance in an engineering space is 0 and there's no allowance for failure, then you're also in a place that's very stringent to change your innovation. And so you need to be able to figure out how can you negotiate this risk tolerance, or how much are you able to fail, mess up, or break something before it becomes a critical problem.
That's true. Okay. That's very interesting. And, but yeah, it's about like failure, handling failure. This is really thought provoking. I just need to, I'm currently like thinking from my perspective, this actually helps me in my current workplace as well. So, and what about the approach? So, for example, how do you approach the front end work when the back end is completely out of control, like it's in a black box? Or, I mean, we usually use kind of like a Swagger, Swagger kind of a documentation, which is known. But this week, I'm currently working on a particular integration where the backend person is actually an intern, and I have been designing this extremely complex front end, which involves a lot of data calculation. And right now, I have got no clue how the backend is going to accept requests or return the response or something like that. So, do you think this is a scenario that happens often? How do you approach the front end when the backend is a black box or out of control?
So there are 2 types of black boxes. I would say the black box in terms of you have no operational control over the backend. So let's say you're plugging into a third party like, Stripe. Stripe can be considered as a black box in the sense that you have no idea if the service could start to fail. And yes, they promised the 9 5s, the 5 9s.
Five nines.
So 5 9s, yeah, the 99.999% availability, which I think gives you like 5 minutes and something or 6 minutes worth of failure or downtime per year, which is really incredible. But again, you never know when those 6 minutes are going to come to bite you. Or even if it's service dependent that they offer. And then there's the black box of like, okay, I have my API that's still in the product development phase or in the design phase. So like, but my front end is ready to go and I'm ready to start building things. And there is an interesting framework that I've seen used from a product development perspective called a RAIDS framework, which is risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. And if you break that down a little bit in the dependencies and assumptions part or risks part, if one of the dependencies is to build my front end, I'm dependent on this backend API endpoint. One of the assumptions I'm making is that this endpoint is designed with this structure. Why am I making this assumption? I'm making this assumption because I already have the designs. So let's say I have the designs and I can go to Figma and I have to render this data intensive application, which shows me a table and I can read all the rows and columns and what, like maybe there are numbers there, maybe there are strings there. So you can make assumptions. So you can use the designs to create a mock version yourself, which there's a very high likelihood you're going to have to change that contract. And then another part of it is the risk. The risk is the fact that you make an assumption and that's going to change down the line. And there's going to be a reconciliation phase where you're going to have to adapt how you've plugged in your backend based on the assumptions that you made. And there's certain things you can do to alleviate that a little bit. If you know what your consuming data model is going to look like, in the sense that I have this table or chart and I know what data I need to pass to these components, you can create an adapter layer. So you just know that whatever I'm receiving from the back end, I am able to map or adapt that into whatever my components are going to receive. And yes, it's this extra layer of abstraction, which may not always be necessary, but is an interesting step. I think the more ultimate or the better way of going about that is an API first design where you can start working on the front end components that have no reliance on data. But the first thing that your backend engineer does is that they create the open API contract, which is what it's going to end up in Swagger. And that generally is tied to code gen tools, which are going to create the scaffolds of the endpoints. And that's what matters the most at the end of the day. And the business logic can come a little bit later.
Do you think even those kind of generators even work? I've seen a lot of things with Node.js and I end up removing every single damn thing and then rewriting the whole complete code. Nothing seems to work for me.
I think it's less so even the fact that, okay, whatever the code generation is has as an output is what you're going to finally use, but there's a one-to-one validation to make sure that whatever I've defined in my spec, I am respecting that same structure or definition in the code that I write. And more so than generating something that may be outside of your coding principles or patterns, but being able to generate something that at the end, when you run through a CI/CD pipeline, it says that, hey, you haven't defined this endpoint, but you have a similar endpoint that's just written a little bit differently or something of the sort. You just make sure that things are, accurate.
Got it.
Have consistency.
Awesome. And I saw that in your previous talks, you have talked about render fast versus recover fast. So let's talk to non-technical people at this point, like product development, and this is related to the engineering maturity. So how would you explain that to a project manager, a product manager, or a non-technical stakeholder? This has been like for me.
The render fast aspect to it is, I think we do love as engineers making something really performant. It's really satisfying seeing something have an execution time of 100 milliseconds and drop down to 10 milliseconds. I think that's something really cool. I would love to spend all my day running performance unit tests on my button components and seeing how performant I can make it. And I think it's a really cool exercise to do, to know the tools that you have available to be able to make something performant. But when I'm talking to somebody somebody non-technical, I think the conversation is around, consumer or user trust. If something renders a little slowly, it is an inconvenience to the user and it's a risk of bouncing. So I think, there was a study done in, if I remember correctly, 2006 or 2008 by Amazon. And if there was an increase in page load time by around about 100 milliseconds, it would reduce their amount of sales by 1%, something of the sort. And there's an inconvenience and there's a monetary loss there. But at the end of the day, if the entire of Amazon is down or they have multiple services, you lose trust. And there's a big difference between trust and inconvenience. If I'm the slowest website, but I'm the most reliable website, I will still have a lot more users than the fastest website that's unreliable. And so it's better to have systems that are able to recover and fall back and show you different ways to get to the end result, whether it's through an error page that routes you elsewhere, then being able to have the error page that renders the fastest. And there's even certain things, certain concepts around rendering the fastest isn't the best thing. There's this library, this front-end library that I really like to bring up sometimes, where it's actually called spin delay. Kenzie Dawes actually worked on this, and he mentioned this in one of the workshops I went to of his. And what was really interesting about spin delay is that there's sometimes the case where you're fetching data from an API, and let's say it takes 10 milliseconds to resolve. But what you usually do is that you start the fetch, you're in a loading phase, you show a loading indicator, then when the fetch is resolved, you remove the loading indicator. But if it resolves in 10 milliseconds, then you're going to show the loading indicator for a blip and it's going to flicker back to the data. And so that's actually a suboptimal user experience, but it renders incredibly fast. And so spin delay allows you to, configure certain functionality where even if the request resolves super fast, you say that at least for 100 milliseconds, the loader is going to show to have a nice continuity of your user experience. And so even fast loading is a problem sometimes.
Yeah, I recently heard about an app that introduces the delay so much so that the users gain trust. I guess it was Skyscanner.
It's Sky. I think that's what I mentioned during my workshop. That was Skyscanner is usually the example that I pull. Yeah, I don't even know if they still do this, but that's. I think I did hear from somebody that, or they at least explained it nicely from a psychological perspective, where when you input like your destination and your origin country in Skyscanner, and it's got to go through multiple providers to get you the best flights. The fact that it takes longer to figure out what your routes look like makes you have more trust in the result because it looks like somebody was thinking. It's just like if I go to a store and I ask, hey, do you have this item available? And the person goes and comes back 3 seconds later and they're like, I couldn't find it. You kind of question your head, did you even try looking for it? Whereas if somebody left for 10 minutes, even if they want to go take a coffee break and they're not looking for your thing, you may have a little bit more trust.
Confidence.
Thinking that. Exactly. And so it is a little bit about user perception when it comes to how you build your user interface and your experience, less so about something being incredibly performant or working in the best way from an engineering perspective.
I worked with a couple of product managers and product owners. Some of the best ones, they hold a degree in psychology. Like I was, wow, okay, and I understand from where you are coming from. So as a front-end engineer, what's something you wish more front-end engineers understood about working with product managers?
With product managers, I think it ties back to understanding what are their business concerns. And so again, another dependent thing is what does your organizational structure look like? Do you have top-down product requirement fits, or do you actually have a bottom-up approach where the individual team is empowered with product engineers to be able to decide the direction that they want to go in? And so if you are working more so from a top-down approach, having a very deep understanding of what are the higher level company goals and how those are broken down. And it's very typically an OKR structure where you have OKRs at the company level, OKRs at the engineering level, and then OKRs at the squad or team or pod levels. And so understanding how does my pod or my team's OKRs affect the engineering OKRs, which then affect the company's OKRs, and understand which OKRs is my product manager trying to shift helps me understand how I can help them do that. And so, when you're looking at an overwhelming Jira board and a massive backlog, being able to help your product manager gauge what's the impact versus effort, not just, hey, this is 3 story points, but help them gauge impact and effort, or even help them with saying that, hey, this feature that you're trying to help me implement only has 3 users, whereas this other feature, I've done the data analysis and gone to Redshift and collected a bunch of information, actually has 100,000 users. We should probably refocus there, giving them your engineering insight into not why something can't be done, but how something can be done. That's a massive help. And then they're also going to have a much easier time advocating for you to have the time that you need for whether it's downtime after an intensive project or being able to work on technical debt that's going to maybe give you a little bit of joy, because sometimes it is fun to work on tech debt. It's great to learn stuff, and it helps us also make decisions a lot faster and be pragmatic when delivering under pressure.
This could be something like a hackathon.
Yeah.
And one question from our YouTube live stream chat. So Sumant asks, how do you architect a React application to handle partial outages or degraded backend services, ensuring the UI remains resilient and user-friendly?
Ooh, I feel like you already know I'm going to bring up error boundary quadrants. I think this is something that we looked at in my workshop. And so one question I usually ask in my workshop is that who uses error boundaries? And then usually you have everyone put their hand up. It's like, yes, of course, use an error boundary. Who doesn't use an error boundary? Okay, who has one root error boundary that's at the top of the application and that's it? And generally at this point, you'll still have 80% of the hands up. And so error boundaries are absolutely fantastic, but there's a certain way to use them. And so if you just have one global wrapper, that's a first great step because you're able to catch a bunch of things and say the application crashed. But what happens if your application is segregated into multiple quadrants? So if I have an application that's got a sidebar, I can consider a sidebar quadrant. Then I have a bunch of dashboards and charts. Let's say a top left chart, top right chart, bottom left, bottom right. Those are 4 more quadrants. Then I have a nav bar. Let's say that's another quadrant. I mean, I don't know quad is 4, but now we're talking about multiple different regions of your application, so to speak. And so now I've just described 6 different regions or components of your application, and each of these can individually fail. If my navigation bar fails or something goes wrong, why should my chart component break? That's a really important question to ask, and that there's no use in that happening. If you have a global error boundary, you risk that the entire application crashes when something goes wrong. And let's say you're like, okay, why would my nav bar crash? So some nav bars are defined in CMSs, and so if you fetch the data from a CMS and it crashes, okay, fine, maybe you have a fallback for the nav bar, but the nav bar doesn't render. But maybe your chart data is coming from another backend, and so different places have different sources, and different sources are going to stop working at certain points in time. And so defining error boundaries per region where it's relevant allows you to have bespoke recovery UIs for every single one of them. Maybe your nav bar uses retries, but your chart data should never use retries. But then your sidebar is cached, and you can rely on the cache if the data fails or whatever your solution may be for that. But breaking things down so that each section of your application has its own bespoke resilience patterns and fallbacks has a much higher chance of surviving in the world.
That's interesting. Very cool. And thank you. Hope, Sumant, you got the answer for... That's a really nice question. And talking about team dynamics and managing up. So not everyone is a tech lead, but every senior dev has to lead something. How do you manage up or influence when you are not the one in charge? This is something to do with my side of things as well. So I recently got into the managerial part and directing the whole organization, but I'm still a junior. So what would be your answer for this?
I think with that one, a lot of ICs sometimes struggle with the authority perspective of things, where you're like, you know what, I've been
believe
writing this code for 15 years. Like, maybe I know something. And then at the same time, also, you may have somebody that's only been working, and I don't even love the words, junior so much, but only working maybe for 1 or 2 years. But let's say they've done 10 years of experience in journalism or in marketing. They have different perspectives. I don't think time, experience, or any of those things should qualify as like, who has authority or not. But there's something to be said about authority is partially given. When you're in a managerial position, you get 15% authority, and the rest of that is earned. You have to earn authority, and you have to earn respect, and that's how you're actually going to make moves in a business. And how you earn part of that respect and how you also get promoted, in my opinion, is through peace of mind. That's how I like to phrase it usually. How much peace of mind am I giving my manager? Am I giving my tech lead? If my tech lead is going to have to be concerned about every single pull request I'm writing because I'm deviating from the coding guidelines, if my manager has to keep looking at me every single one-to-one and ask me why I'm, causing frustration in architectural discussions, then that means I'm somebody of concern. Sometimes I've even had managers say, or even I've said this myself as a manager, is that my biggest compliment is that I don't think about you. Because they're dealing with so many higher level problems. You have a one-to-one with one individual. You have a one-to-one with your VP of engineering. They've got one-to-ones with 20 other people. If you're not on their radar, that's not a bad thing. Yes, you have to advocate for your work, and you have to make notes of like, hey, this is all the performance I've done. And you help them say that you're at a stage where you can grow, and that's part of the process too. But if you're not worrying them, then that means you're giving the space and freedom to be able to work on the initiatives that you want to. It's a lot about empathy in the same way for the PM role and having empathy for their business requirements. It's having empathy for the person that's trying to help you. A tech lead has responsibilities. A tech lead and a manager's responsibilities, and actually their performance is through other people's performance. And so it can't even be typical that you get into a space where there are a lot of micromanaging managers, and it's very rare to be taught as a manager on how to not be like that. And so all you want to do is, as the second you go from an IC to being a manager, you're like, I could do that better. So I'm going to go and fix that code. I'm going to go and review that PR. And you start doing all the technical stuff just because you have the authority with it. And it's also because you have no peace of mind because nobody's giving you that space to be able to step back. Now, there's a lot of emotional regulation work you have to do as a manager to be able to step back. It's a two-part role, but I think the biggest part is peace of mind. Again, giving yourself space to fail by understanding the people around you that you have to work with.
This is so true. And we have an ad hoc question from Akash Joshi from LinkedIn. What are all the most important kinds of tests you have implemented? So this person is actually, I believe you know him, right?
I know Akash. I was going to say hello, Akash.
Yeah, so go on.
Okay, what are the most important tests I've implemented?
What are the most important kinds of tests? Yeah.
Kinds of tests. Ooh, that's a very interesting one. I would really say unit tests. Unit tests, because let's say you are in a scenario where your team is built in a structure where you don't do end-to-end tests, or your end-to-end tests are flaky. And it's very, very common for end-to-end tests to be flaky. And even places where they have like 3 retries for your end-to-end test suite, which again, then I don't really know if that's going to give me that much confidence. Again, it's that whole concept of it being a pillar of confidence. In unit tests, and especially if your code base is JavaScript and not TypeScript, I mean, that's another thing on top of that. Unit tests allow you to test edge cases that would be almost near impossible sometimes to be able to test from a user perspective.
We only be able to like recreate it programmatically.
Exactly. And so, you'll even have, primarily when you're working with JavaScript code bases, unit tests where you would pass a string to a function that should only receive a number. Now in TypeScript, you may not care so much about that because you're going to find out way beyond. But in those days, that's what you would do to make sure that it would handle that appropriately. And so there was little to no way of being able to actually reproduce that in a user-facing environment. And what you definitely don't want to be doing is modifying your code to test a bad case and then switching it back. You want to be testing the exact same code that's going to end up in production. So you have local to prod parity or staging to prod parity. There should never be any differences like, oh, this environment is different in this way because of this edge case or whatever. You need to have it exactly the same.
Got it. That's true. Akash, are you still around? Hoping to get a reply from you if that was helpful. Oh, we spoke about good things going wrong, right? So when things go wrong, for example, outages, bad releases, what's your mental model for how engineers should show up?
I think that's a big part of that is understanding or like the people you're surrounded by. So when you have outages, when you have failures, these are high pressure scenarios. These are scenarios where like, oh my God, maybe it's after work hours, it's 8 o'clock or it's 6 a.m. and you're like, we're human beings. We may not be in the right mood. We may be going through personal issues or so on and so forth. There's a lot of stress that comes out and a lot of emotional regulation that comes out. And so a big part of this is like, do you feel like your team has done the legwork to be able to actually perform and work harmoniously together? And this speaks really to like the 4 core phases of team development, where you form as a team together, you storm a lot, so you may have arguments, you may have uncomfortable conversations. But once you understand each other, you go through a normalization phase and then a performing phase. And so if you've never gotten to the place of having getting comfortable with having an uncomfortable conversation with somebody, you may actually struggle to be very effective in a high pressure situation. Because how you should show up in an outage or scenario is, I'm dropping my current non-critical work, I'm stepping my ego aside on what I think is the best engineering solution, and I am putting my foot forward to volunteer my time and efforts for whatever is my realm of expertise to be able to help alleviate the pressure, or showing up in terms of like, maybe there's some people that are on holiday that would have been better fit to work on this stuff, and being able to, help with the process of rolling back and getting to a working state. But not only that, communicating back and writing up your postmortems, making sure that their actions afterwards, setting up a postmortem meeting and taking end-to-end ownership, so that actually, because outages are bound to happen, it's actually creating an engineering environment where you're able to have those crucial conversations, and then team members actually feel like they can go on holiday, that the fort is being held, and they don't have to feel like every single time they're abandoning a responsibility when they do that. And that allows you to not burn out. And that can happen very quickly.
Very true. Yep. It's all about time management and priorities and stuff like that. So then what has helped you build the trust with the leadership, especially when you're pushing for less visible work like observability or testing infrastructure? There are like loads and loads of things in this thing. For example, I'm an architect. I work on optimizing. I recently worked on optimizing a lot of things. So unfortunately, they can't see what kind of tangibility the work has created. So what should we do in this case?
There again, like, anyone in the leadership position, the first question I ask them are like, what are the 3 things concerning you or worrying you today, this week, or this quarter? Or like, maybe they're worried about retention and there are a lot of employees that are leaving or something of the sort. Maybe they're worried about performance review season. Maybe they're worried about the fact that, our availability is not even 99%. And so if I'm going to advocate for things that are not things they're really worrying about, maybe it is difficult to get on their line of visibility. But first, what I look for is, do I actually have something that I'm trying to bring to light that is relevant in terms of the things that they're currently concerned with? And am I bringing to light the right things? If they're worried about our availability and I'm going to bring up a subject that's entirely different, then maybe I need to realign my priorities and help them with their goals and then find a new slot in another quarter to work on the other goals. I think that's one first thing about that. You're helping each other out, and that's important in that relationship from a leadership perspective. Again, that they give you that freedom and space to work on your stuff. Then if you want to bring to light stuff that maybe will just never pop up on their radar, internal product demos are a really creative way to do that. Most people will, show the technical side and give a little bit of a code demo and say, hey, this was really cool. I built it. I enjoyed it. I learned these couple of lessons, and the primary target will be engineers. And so it depends on are the product demos you have engineering show and tells, you have a target audience of engineers, or is it a, company-wide demo that you're doing? And so how am I able to tie the story of what I'm working on to maybe one of the OKRs, one of the business metrics you're trying to move along, and to maybe one of the concerns that some of the leadership is having, to say that, hey, I'm doing valuable work here and it's moving the needle, and maybe it should be on your radar. And especially if your business has metrics or systems to tell you how your work is directly affecting revenue. So like I work on a monetization team. And so when I ship a feature, I'm able to actually check and see how much that increased our annual recurring revenue. And so whenever I give a product demo, I'm either showing how much money I saved us or how much money we are potentially going to make with something being released. And naturally that is going to get on somebody's radar. The same way of mean time to resolution or recovery, that is also going to save money and other things like that. And so you're actually showing how are you somebody that reduces the risk that the company is being exposed to through different engineering practices. That brings visibility. Observability does the same thing. You have to tie that story into why should somebody else care about it, not just this is why I'm interested in it.
This is great. I can actually put some efforts on this in my place as well. And talking about the careers and leveling up, career growth, how do you evaluate whether you're growing as an engineer? What kind of signals matter to you beyond the title and the salary?
My first signal is when I go back to a certain file or code that I've written and I look at it, I'm like, who wrote this mess? Who wrote this mess? And I look at
there, right? That should always be there. Only then we can see ourselves improving over time. But
exactly,
so bad that what did I even write this code?
I'll no comment on that one. I've written some questionable code. But then you go look at the commits and you're like, oh, I did this 6 months ago, and now you have a brand new perspective on that. And especially when I'm entering a new role, I see that a lot because I don't have context on the code base, especially a product that may be 10 years old. You're bound to make mistakes because you don't understand the architecture of the product. The biggest thing around growth is, as teams have retrospective, do you actually have your own retrospectives, your own reflective processes to be able to see how much have you progressed? A colleague of mine told me that something that he does is every time there's a cool product release, he actually notes it down and puts it somewhere, whether it's, you want to put it on your LinkedIn, or maybe you want to put it, as a note of like, here are my achievements that I've done. And so if you're able to see that things that you're achieving over time are things that you would have struggled to achieve in the past, that's also like a really great indicator. The way that I tend to handle this is that when I have one-to-ones with my manager, and I've done this with a lot of managers in the past, is that I just write down a TLDR of the things I've shipped in a week. Because naturally, my managers may not be paying attention to that. They may not even be directly involved in my team, but it's not only a recognition of the work that I've done, it allows them to question the work that I've done, because I want my work to be questioned if I'm not aligned with my priorities. And it's also an indicator for me that I can scroll on every single one-to-one notes I've had over the past couple of weeks and actually see the progress of that. And by the time you get to a performance conversation, you've already documented over 6 months or 12 months all the things that you've done. And does that actually align to what growth means within your organization? Because growth within every single organization has very different meanings. In some organizations, you can only grow when other people grow because there's a lack of growth in general. Scale-ups, you can grow for the sake of growing because you're trying to make positions for less experienced people to come in, and then you go to leadership positions. But in organizations with stabilized revenues, and we're
where people are not being promoted very often, growth can mean something else entirely. And so you also have to understand, do you want to align your growth with what growth means within your organization, or what growth means from a global tech sector perspective? And like, how am I lining up with other engineers around me? When I go to conferences very often, I'm usually like, wow, I probably am the dumbest person in the room and I need to level up a lot more. And so that's also an incredible way.
A lot of times. I usually do all these conferences for food, but yes, then comes the learning, then comes the imposter syndrome that I never try to wake it up. But yeah, that is also something that gets into my part. And coming to that, something related. So what something that you felt like it's not a part of my work, or like an extra work early in your career, but now you saw, oh my God, it's good that I made the site. It's good that I invested time in it. It's not something like I shouldn't have. It's great. Extra work. What do you see which is good now?
A couple of things here. The first one was, early on, I tried to fail as much as I could, as fast as I could. And this is something that I've always told us experienced developers that are very eager to get promoted. In my last job, when I was an engineering manager, like I worked with a lot of individuals that were classified in the junior title or role, and they were like, I want to go to mid-level, I want to go to mid-level. I'm like, do you feel like you've failed as much as you can within a junior role? Because it's going to be lovely when you go to a mid-level role or a senior level role or a tech lead role, and the salary looks a lot greater, but the tolerance for risk and failure tends to get a little bit slimmer. And so you're going to be a lot more scared or have a lot more anxiety around failing when you go up in level, and you're going to then reduce, actually how much you may be able to learn, because you learn through failure. And so the biggest thing I did is that, like, I took my sweet time, picking up projects that I knew were difficult, going and doing things that I knew I might fail at or I may get confused at. Like I am a front-end engineer, but I've also picked up back-end engineering roles and found out that, okay, I messed up really bad with certain integrations. Needed a lot of help from other people, but those made me realize, what are my limits? How do I learn? How do I, ask for help at the right point in time? Because even the most senior people need help sometimes. And it gave me all the tools that I need to not say that I'm the best developer that I am now at a staff engineer level, but I know how to go about problem solving in a way that's pragmatic and effective. And that means more over time. As an engineer, you're a problem solver. You don't have the solutions for all the problems, but you have the breadth of exposure to a lot of failures. There's that. And then I was always hungry in terms of building side projects. I know as engineers, we love building side projects. I would do like silly, things like doing 30 mini apps in 30 days, or I would contribute to open source projects and have my PR reviews absolutely obliterated by people 10 times smarter than me, go through 20 revisions before a PR went in and understood what it means to actually effectively get something into an open source project. That's why I think open source projects at Raycast are really great, because they're built of like a lot of mini open source projects. So all their extensions are like mini React Native applications. So the bar for getting in isn't as high as other open source projects, which have a lot of context and history that you need to be able to absorb. So that's also something that helps a lot. And what I really had was, from the start of my engineering jobs and everything, I had one side project. I built this fitness booking app. And every time I wanted to learn a new technology, I would evolve the application to use that tech stack. So I started in basic React. Then I shifted to Next.js. Then I was using REST APIs, but then I wanted to use GraphQL. Then I wanted to use Prisma as an ORM. And so every time I was faced with a challenge at work, like, okay, I'm not going to use Netlify and Vercel to deploy, but I'm going to actually deploy via AWS and make, do things that I would have expected to be doing at a more professional level. Exactly. I would then do that in that project, because then I could fail in that project and never have any risks come out of it. But at least I knew I dealt with these tools enough to be able to have a starting point when working on them professionally.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the practical approach that we take will actually be helpful. So like, I see a lot of people, hey, Surya, and what about mid-level engineers who are trying to break into staff impact without burning out or becoming cynical. So what is your advice?
So there is that I think a lot of people have told me in the past that it just takes time and experience. And I've rarely, I don't want to say never, I've rarely appreciated feedback like that, because sometimes you want to understand, how can I fit more experience in a smaller slot of time? Or do I just have to wait 15 years to meet that benchmark and then say I have 15 years of experience in tech? And if you're spending 15 years just doing the same thing and you're never learning, your quality of experience is the same as somebody who spent 5 years doing a lot more. And the simplest way that I can explain this is that if you want to run fast, you got to run with people that are a lot faster than you. And I take this actually to when I used to be a CrossFit trainer and an athlete before I was in software engineering. And so I used to do all my gymming and working out in a CrossFit box in Switzerland. And Switzerland, over there, they've got incredible athletes, but in the region that I was at, in the demographic, the level of athletes were just never going to be the same athletes as when I moved to London. And I lived in London for a couple of months, or in 2019 to 2020. And over there, I went to a gym that's called WIT, stood for whatever it takes. The caliber of athletes over there was something that I had never seen before. And I didn't change my gym schedule. I just changed my environment and the types of people that I was surrounded by. And I was able to run faster, lift more, do more in such a shorter period of time than I was ever able to do in the past. And so if you have the opportunity to be surrounded by people that are smarter than you, in different verticals, from an engineering perspective, from a soft skill perspective, from a life experience and wisdom perspective, it's just a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. And the way I've done that is conferences and meetups. Like, I have an incredible privilege of, I don't have a lot of time to learn these days because I'm doing. And I have the privilege of being able to fly people out to my meetups in Zurich and bring some of the smartest people to me. Like this Thursdays, or just we had Matteo Colina over, and also Wout Martin, who's on the Quick core team and one of the Node.js core team members. And I got to learn from incredible people that I am so lucky to be able to call friends. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm next month where Elian, who was working on Astro, is coming over. And so I'm able to surround myself with people that are of such a high caliber that I myself am able to grow in ways that maybe would be more limiting if I just stuck within the scope of my engineering role. So it is breadth of that exposure that makes a massive difference. And first of all, also being open to hearing other people's opinions. I know I have this flaw myself, is that sometimes I'm there to speak too fast or think my opinion is more important than somebody else's. And no, being able to be vulnerable, being able to be humble and take a step back and even just learn a different perspective of the same problem is an incredible experience to have, and will always be a value add more than anything else.
That's true. And Astro projects like Astro are huge impact projects. Lot of front end. I think I heard about Astro from Akash, but yeah, it's super huge and super helpful for a lot of startups, especially. And I think we are almost nearing the time, and let's have some closing reflections. So if someone wants to build a real impact as a front-end engineer, not just good apps, but good systems and teams, what's your one non-obvious piece of advice?
Non-obvious. It seems incredibly cliche to say, but really, really just, and I don't want to say the word just, but really consider thinking outside the box, and the box is the front end. That is it.
Okay, that's cool. That's nice to know. So something like you have to think from the perspective of backend and the DevOps side of things.
It's empathy at the end of the day. It's empathy of understanding the humans you work with and the systems that you work with. At the end of the day, if a human's under pressure, they will crumble. And if a system's under pressure, it'll also crumble. So it's different levels of empathy that we have through our engineering and our human practices.
And you've also built at scale. So we talk about scaling and empathy. Now you have already built at scale, mentored others, and spoken at conferences. What keeps you grounded, man? Like what keeps this meaningful for you? What do you get in this? I mean, I have lots. I'm getting friends. I'm getting some kind of like, dude, I'm a friend with Faris. That is something that I'm taking away as well because you are such an amazing person. You're such a gem and down to earth person. So what is your
Like, but likewise, Praveens, these incredible experiences here. It's like just what I said. It's like it's a humbling experience. It's people at the end of the day. Nothing works without people. And I want to be on a lifelong journey of learning. I'm a very self-reflective individual. I know my flaws. I know I can sometimes be a very stern person. I can be sometimes a strong-headed individual, and I want to just learn, and I want to break down certain habits of mine and learn through those experiences, other people's wisdoms, and so on and so forth. And being able to have the chance to just build upon who I know I am as an individual and take my core values and find new ways to express them. And I found that being able to help other people and teach other people was just an incredible way to do that. I mean, being able to go at a conference stage, and then I think the first time I ever did a meetup talk, I had conversations lasting 2 hours later. I mean, a very typical thing that happens is that when I go to a conference, I lose my voice. In 24 hours, my voice is gone. I give a workshop, I do the talks. I need lozenges to be able to get my voice back. And that's just a testament to how much I love talking to other people. And I even hear this from my colleagues, you talk too much. I'm like, yes, I talk too much, but I love conversing. I love learning. I love experiencing. I love traveling. And so I think whatever I can do to contribute back into the engineering space that's contributed so much to my career is something I always want to keep leveling up at.
Yeah, giving back to the society, and also your network is your net worth. These are the two things that I always
100%.
Yeah, super. So wow, man, it was indeed a huge eye opener for me. I learned a lot of things. So how did you feel about the whole experience? I mean, I'm not sure, you might have done a lot of things, I don't know whether this exact setup you have done. So what do you think? What's your experience so far?
I was so excited that this webcam I'm using right now was purchased just for this webinar.
Wow.
No, I mean, I love it. I mean, you can do these things 100 times, and I've done a couple of these things by now, but none of them are the same. No conference is the same. No conversation is the same. And even if the topic is the same, everything brings out its own unique perspective to the conversation. And I just love that. I love every question. I love every angle. I love every participation of it. And that's it. It allows me to also take the time to reflect afterwards. What is something new that I could bring to the conversation? What's something new that I could start as a project? It's inspirational just to have these conversations.
Amazing. So for me, it is mainly about people ask some questions which are oh wow, can you even think that way? Nice. Okay, what if really that is the scenario? What will I do? It is kind of like a disaster recovery. You think ahead before something happens, and then wow, this is something that is needed, and that's how I see things. And yeah, we have loads and loads of similar things. When are you coming back to London again?
I am coming back end of July. I already have tickets booked. End of July, I already have tickets booked.
So let's make another event in person, and then let's make it live as well. So this is going to be super cool. Okay, come home, come to the YouTube studio here, and that would also be an amazing thing for me. So thanks a lot. Any last closing words?
Thank you. Any last closing words? I mean, it's a Sunday, so take some time to recover, first of all. That's important. You can't work 24/7. And then I just be curious. Just stay curious. I mean, you cannot hear and learn about everything in a singular hour, nor in a singular conference, but having that breadth of exposure of understanding the things that exist in the world and the ways of thinking that exist in the world is a great starting point to be able to just continue your learning and discovery. And if you want to learn anything more, have any questions, just hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'm very much happy to start a conversation. But yeah, thank you so much, Praveen.
Thank you. And those people are watching here without subscribing, hit the subscribe button, hit the like, share it with everyone. And on LinkedIn, we both are even here in LinkedIn, we are live here. So go hit Faris, hit me as well, and ask me any questions. I'm happy to talk to new people. And have a happy Sunday, and see you all.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.